This is mCDR Explained. We're going to talk a lot about community inclusion in the research and development of mCDR, how it is a potential ocean climate solution, and some projects that some of us have going on in that vein. So for those who don't know me, I'm Ruth Driscoll-Lovejoy. I'm the mCDR lead at Ocean Visions. We are one of the co-hosts for this event, and just a few quick notes that I have written down. We are recording the panel. We will get to Q&A, but it won't see you if you don't come right in front of the camera. Almost all the QR codes you'll see in the upcoming slides will take you to the mCDR EdChow landing page. At the bottom of that page is a list of resources that the co-host organizations and panelists have compiled for you. Okay, with that, let's get into some mCDR. All right, so first I'd like to take the moment to remind us that we live on a blue planet. Overheating and carbon imbalances at the atmosphere are overheating and causing imbalances in the ocean, and vice versa. This is why that's at the heart of our work at Ocean Visions. We have a pretty simple belief. The ocean matters deeply to all of us. We are all hardwired to the ocean in some way, whether you come from a landlocked state like I do, or you grew up surfing every day. You have some connection and some reliance on the ocean. With it meaning so much to us, and climate change putting enormous pressure on the ocean, we need to better understand which additional tools in our current reality may be safe, effective, and worth pursuing alongside rapid emission cuts. So for those of you who may be a little unfamiliar with Ocean Visions, we are a science-based conservation NGO that sits at the center of a growing network whose membership includes leading universities, oceanographic institutions, and a diverse set of practitioner partners with whom we are working to accelerate innovation and learning, narrow uncertainties, rule out unworkable ocean climate pathways early, and advance promising options responsibly. We've grounded our strategy in the reality that new pathways and new tools are urgently needed to directly address climate-induced stresses to the ocean and to repair and recover the ocean. Our work focuses on slowing, stopping, and ultimately reversing climate impacts on the ocean and maintaining and restoring critical parts of the Earth system. And if you spend any time with any of us at Ocean Visions, and our CEO is here too, you'll hear about our 4 R's, which is really the foundation of our strategy. So we have the 4 R's standing for reduce, which is emissions reduction. We have remove, as in removing greenhouse gases. Repair, as in safeguarding critical ocean systems. And reach, which is building the global capacity and societal support of ocean climate solution leaders around the globe. All right. If you paid attention to the invitation, you are about to get a primer on mCDR. We all know we need large-scale emission reductions. I've already mentioned it a few times. And also to combat legacy carbon dioxide pollution and manage for hard-to-abate sectors like aviation, we also need to perform carbon dioxide removal, and we really need it in a very big way. The State of CDR 3rd edition, which was released just yesterday, identifies that we need to be performing 7 to 9 gigatons. Actually, I didn't check that. I'm still taking that from the previous edition, but I'm going to guess that right now it's still saying the same thing. I will update this slide accordingly once I can read the report. But still, we need a lot of gigatons of carbon removal per year by 2050 to attempt to meet global international climate goals when balanced with other sustainability goals. And the carbon dioxide removal required, we've got the inclusion of conventional CDR, which accounts for an overwhelming majority of the 2.2 gigatons of CDR currently being performed per year. Conventional CDR activities are things that you're probably very familiar with already. Even if you're not in the ocean space, it's mostly like forest management, things that you probably have seen several times. But to get to the 7 to 9 gigatons per year, we will need to dramatically scale up novel CDR which does also include or could include mCDR. With these numbers and the fact that the ocean is the largest reservoir for carbon, you may start to understand why Ocean Visions and our co-hosting organizations here today have taken such an interest in exploring the potential for marine CDR to be safe and effective. And this brings me to your specific overview of what does mCDR potentially look like. You can see the rendering here. This is several of the kinds of approaches that come under the mCDR umbrella. It's a portfolio of approaches. And mCDR pathways do one of the following to remove carbon dioxide pollution from ocean waters, allowing the ocean to then take up additional carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. One, a pathway may use the biological process of photosynthesis to transform carbon in seawater into algae biomass, and it stores that carbon in the deep ocean. For example, ocean iron fertilization is one type of phytoplankton-based CDR, where the addition of iron, which is a limiting nutrient in the ocean, is added to marine waters to stimulate phytoplankton growth. Such activities would most likely be performed in the offshore ocean space. Two, an mCDR pathway could add a base material, alkalinity, to seawater to enhance the ocean's natural ability to take up carbon and also reduce acidification. For example, ocean alkalinity enhancement, also known as OAE, can include mixing olivine, which is a naturally abundant alkaline material, into coastal sand, which then the waves and the tides take into the ocean slowly. Well, that is a coastal example. Alkaline materials may be placed in open waters as well, which is what the recent Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, their Loch Ness field trial performed in the Gulf of Maine. That's what they're studying. Three, pathways may also directly capture carbon that is dissolved in the seawater and sequester it off-site, which again, that allows for the ocean to then absorb more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Direct ocean capture, also known as electrochemical carbon dioxide removal, includes both electrodialytic and electrolytic processes. Yeah, I didn't know what electrodialytic meant either. In electrodialytic approaches, electricity provides the energy to arrange the most common components of seawater. So you've got H2O, the water, and you've got sodium chloride, the salt, into acidic and basic components, the solutions. The acidic solution can then be used to strip dissolved inorganic carbon from the seawater in the form of gaseous carbon dioxide, or the basic solution can be used to strip the dissolved inorganic carbon by precipitating, kind of putting it all together, solid calcium carbonate. Electrolytic approaches split water and salt into hydrogen and oxygen and or chlorine gases, and that produces alkaline metal hydroxide and acid byproducts. When you add that to the surface of seawater, the hydroxide reacts with the carbon dioxide in seawater to then form dissolved alkaline bicarbonate. I'm not going to test you, don't worry. And as you'll hear today, and a big topic for the panel, the scientific research and innovation inherent and necessary in the mCDR landscape, it's really only a part of the picture. There are also the social dynamics, questions of appropriate governance, and questions about sustainable financing. We also need to be able to monitor, report, and verify CDR activities to ensure that projects are effectively doing what they say they're doing. They are taking out and storing carbon for a durable period. And part of the larger work our organizations are doing is bringing focus to the need for research and development funding for mCDR technologies, not only because CDR is large and crucial and mCDR has a lot of potential, but we also want rapidly emerging technology to get ahead, to not get ahead of the science or ahead of community capacity to make informed decisions. So with that, I'm going to turn to the panelists. And I'd love for Nasya, Mara, and Kelly to say a little bit about how you got into this field, what you're doing right now, and what might you be sharing with us today?
Hey everyone, my name is Nasya Dodson. I use she, her pronouns. I actually work across CDR generally. mCDR being a subsection of that is something that I have the cool and new opportunity to work on. But my background is law, graduated from Howard Law with a specialization in EJ. So I work on making sure that carbon removal is developed and scaled with an emphasis on equity and justice. And I can pass it. I think that's the question.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you all here today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Karageozian. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate researcher at the Consortium for Science, Policy, and Outcomes, which is housed at Arizona State University. We are based in DC, though. We are not from the Tempe campus in Arizona. I'm very happy to have wet summers that are slightly cooler than 122 degrees. At the consortium, my role is our expert and stakeholder rights holder engagement lead. With the consortium's work, we really sit at the intersection between talking with public and experts on emerging science and technology topics, some that are coming up like mCDR, others that may be more philosophical. A lot of our work kind of sits with trying to figure out what's going on, what the pulse is, and what the public thinks, and incorporating values and trust judgments and giving those back to federal agencies or any partners that are hiring us. I will be talking later about our community and expert engagement work that we've done on mCDR. My background, I have to say, is in geological sciences. Geology is one of those great fields that kind of touches so many other physical sciences. It's been really great to be in this ocean community and doing this work.
Hi, I'm Kelly Ospik. I'm a senior program officer at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. We are a nonprofit organization that is focused on providing objective advice to the nation on scientific matters. We were established under Abraham Lincoln's administration to do just that, and we hope we can continue doing just that. Professionally, I'm a mix of a civil engineer and a physical oceanographer, mostly project manager, I would say. I've been fascinated with the motion of the ocean my entire life, interested in wave energy and marine mammals and just absolutely everything. And then when I was in exploring graduate schools, I realized that oceanography kind of combined all the sciences, and then I was hooked. I just absolutely loved it. I did focus in physical, kind of natural segue from engineering. And I spent my first part of my career in the energy industry in Houston, and quickly left and joined the nonprofit world. And that's where I've been ever since. My career's led to some really great projects at the intersection of science and policy, from oil in the sea and how it affects the environment. Where does it go once it leaks? Plastic pollution in the ocean, ocean observing systems. There's been a lot of talk about that today. And ocean climate work, which that's what I'm here today to talk to you about. But I would consider myself more of an ocean generalist who is extremely lucky to be working on this exciting topic.
It's so great to hear how excited all of y'all are in your components of the mCDR landscape. Before I get us into the presentations, talking about being somebody who got excited about going into the oceans. I became a marine biologist because, like all the other kids, I love marine creatures. That charismatic megafauna, that's for me. And then I didn't outgrow it, so I went into marine biology school. But it's so crucial to recognize, we all thought we were going to get the emissions reduction, right? We thought recycling works. And now as a millennial adult, the realization is we are in a different reality from what my childhood said was going to be environmental work, of how to steward the health of the ocean. We are in this new reality where we have to do something that none of us wanted to do. I've been talking about this great meme. If you are not on LinkedIn following carbon removal memes, please do so. And there's this great meme where it's, happy runner, and it's like, that's supposed to be the carbon dioxide molecule living its best life. And then there's the like creeping man behind the happy carbon dioxide removal, and that's carbon removal. And it's like, yeah, no one wanted to like sneak up on carbon dioxide removal and be like, I gotcha. No, we wanted to go play with dolphins and whales and sea slugs and corals and whatever else. So I just want to take a moment to recognize that as we get into the materials, because we will be talking about like, how do we engage with others on this topic? How do we tell them why this is important when even all of us were like, but couldn't we have just done those emissions reductions first? Unfortunately, we're at the point where we really need this. As I was saying, we need 7 to 9 gigatons. It's a lot of zeros. And we're only at 2.2. And that's the third edition of the state of CDR. The last one was we were accomplishing 2.1. We have not increased enough. So with that, let's give some hope. Nasya, I'm gonna put a lot on your shoulders. But we'd love to hear about the core framework at Carbon 180.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm actually super excited to talk about this framework. It is the brainchild of our entire organization, shepherded by my team, which is Equity and Justice, and our Science and Innovation team. We can skip slides. I'm absolutely going to get into what we created and how we went about making this framework. But at the outset, I want to talk a little bit about the why. What was the impetus for this? Something that we noticed at Carbon 180 is that, of course, carbon removal is becoming real, right? Like, we're no longer talking about theory. Ocean alkalinity enhancement is happening. Like, folks are working towards direct ocean capture, and these activities are creating real impacts for communities in their lived and natural environments. So we were scoping and looking at an opportunity for us to be able to influence the speed at which carbon removal is scaling. So we noticed an opportunity to embed things like equity, justice, and climate benefits in these projects as they're coming online. In scoping that opportunity, something that we noticed is like across our community partners, folks who are working on project development, folks who are running carbon removal programs, is that not everyone has the same understanding and expectation of things like community benefits or community co-benefits, or that not everyone has the same metrics and standards for the success of carbon removal. We also noticed that when folks use terms like accountability and transparency, that not everyone had the same definition or shock. Not everyone assigned the same value or placement on a timeline for accountability and transparency. So we saw a real opportunity to kind of ground the conversations around a speedily developing field and enter our, Carbon 180 core framework, our attempt at trying to mitigate some of that disconnect and friction we were seeing in carbon removal conversations. And we can go to the next slide. So this is just an overview of our framework. We created it to try to close the gap between the speed at which carbon removal, including mCDR, is scaling and the need for community code development. Essentially, in a one-shot, we're offering baselines and expectations. So when you interact with this framework, it's not a checklist. It's not like a yes or no, this is a fabulous project if you do all of these things, but it does offer shared language. So irrespective of who you are or how familiar you are with carbon removal, you can come to a table of folks and everyone has the same definition of justice and equity and what that work looks like in practice. We also named that we did this work in service of communities, climate, and environmental systems. I won't go too deep because I feel like we actually do have a shared understanding of what these terms are, but I'm happy to clarify that if I'm presuming, and then we can go to the next slide. But that's a large charge. We're pretty much saying that we set out to build equity and justice more intentionally into the field. That's putting a lot of dip on our chip. So I want to break down a bit how we went about doing that. I apologize for the text heavy slide, but decisions had to be made because we only have 5 slides. The first column that you see is our issues statement in our framework. So we've condensed conversations that we've had across the field where we're asking people like, okay, from your perspective, what's impeding your work? What's holding you back from meaningfully engaging with carbon removal and mCDR across academia, policymakers, communities, project developers? And the four that we were able to kind of condense all of that feedback into were structural inequities, so people not being able to meaningfully participate in decision-making that affects them. We talk about governance failures and why people think that accountability is something that can't be embedded into carbon removal and mCDR. We also talk about environmental and health risks, and we talk about weaknesses in climate accounting. So it's come up a little bit, but making sure that carbon removal claims are valid and that we're not just doing things and there's no evidence of it. And in solving these four challenges, we came up with our core principles. These are terms like justice, equity, transparency, net negativity. And we see these as the work that underscores what needs to be done to start solving these issues. We've defined them, they live on our website, they're also in our report. But this was in pursuit of creating that shared language and naming what we're working towards. Feedback that we got on our principles that was very real, and we think the people who gave us this was like, okay, great, justice and equity are things that we want to do, but what does that mean in mCDR? Like, what's a just mCDR project? What's an equitable mCDR project? And so we transition our framework into our core practices, which are just that. There are principles operationalized. So we name things like knowledge building, which is going to communities and indigenous groups, co-learning and sharing and attributing data. We talk about independent verification and dignified workforce development are things that you can embed in mCDR projects that do showcase things like transparency, enforcement, and inclusion. And we also include examples of all of these practices in the real world so that you're not just reading a report and it sounds great that we're talking about full system carbon accounting, but you can see these things in action and not just on paper. We can go to the next slide. Second to last, I just wanted to include an example of that in the real world and not just on paper. But on our website, we have a ton of resources, one of which is kind of a walkthrough of an ocean alkalinity enhancement project. We got a question like, okay, great, we love this practice, but what's step one? Like, what's step one if I want to go into a community? Because it can't just be saying, hey, we really want to do ocean alkalinity enhancement here. So what we offer are some advice and strategies on things like site selection, doing social assessments. So like regarding site selection, there's a pathway with OAE that's called onshore. So you situate your ocean alkalinity site next to existing infrastructure. And there are benefits where it's like you're not causing disturbance to the coastline because you're building off of something that already exists, and you don't need to build out a ton of new infrastructure to do this work. But there are also folks who lived there before the OAE project happened. And so you want to understand what their sentiments are regarding a desalination plant or a power plant that you are situating yourself next to. So we make recommendations like that for really thoughtful site selection. We make recommendations for social assessment and partnering with local offices of community development and sustainability. Everywhere you go, work is already being done, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to community engagement, engaging capacity. It is important to plug in out of respect for the work that's already being done. And first touch points should be, hey, this is what I want to do. What's your capacity? Because we're all working with different funding sources, different amounts of staffing, timelines. So we talk about capacity building, and we also talk about environmental impact mapping with communities. I'm going to scoot because I feel like I'm coming up on time. So I just want to name some of the ways that core alignment and mCDR are showing up at Carbon 180 now and in the future. That core alignment shows up in our very new mCDR policy roadmap, which was designed and very recently published by our Mighty Ocean team of two. That's Amanda and Stacy. Congratulations on that again. We have a coastal regranting program, which is where we receive funding from external folks, and we distribute it at the community level to people who are interested in designing carbon removal unique to them and their interests. Our current coastal cohort, who are awesome, are folks from Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, some of whom were already doing mCDR in their communities and could just benefit from the capacity support and the exchange of information. and others are folks who are like, I want to figure out what this looks like for me and appreciate the support that we're able to bring. Our ocean team is also setting up an mCDR forum. Please join. It's across all perspectives and stakeholders, and it will be an open channel of communication and collaboration for folks who are working on mCDR. And finally, just staying dedicated to a multi-pathway approach. I think something super novel about Carbon 180 is that we advocate for all types of mCDR, and it really allows us to go into communities and help folks right size what carbon removal looks like for them, because not every solution is for every community. So staying with that is something we're excited about as well. And that's it. Thanks so much for your time.
So Mara, following on Lucia's centering of communities, from my experience in the mCDR field, I know that mCDR startups and NGOs and research institutions, like everybody is very charged and like wants to do community engagement. Like I haven't heard anybody like, let's not talk to people. And they want to do it the right way. But often until you have like the project, the idea of what you're going to do, and specifically, and Kelly may be able to talk about this a little bit more, what type of mCDR you're going to do, that's going to dictate where you can go in the communities you're going to have to approach. And the premise for a lot of your work is that engagement is actually not the right tool. So I'm hoping that you can tell us more about what you've learned about community capacity and what that really means for the mCDR landscape.
Great, thank you so much, Ruth. Yeah, so I'd like to just also give like a primer to this. I'm going to talk both from a public engagement perspective and an expert engagement perspective, which is a really privileged place to speak from, of having been able to do both those sets of work. So we can go to the next slide. So a little bit more about the Consortium for Science Policy and Outcomes, because we're a very small and nimble team here in DC. So it's likely that we may not have networked with all of you yet. But so we are housed just 2 blocks north of the White House at the ASU building here in the city. And our goal at the consortium is really to make science work better for people and make those connections that can actually make that happen. So our goal is to find ways to have science and technology be developed in a responsible way and in a way that involves public trust and values. And we do a lot of our work with federal agencies that are looking for guidance for policy development. Sometimes it's prioritization, mission prioritization, research direction, and a lot of our work then sits at talking to the public about how they feel. And our goal is to do research, partnerships, public engagement, and then like I have up here also rethinking and reframing. And the rethinking and reframing pieces come in a lot this past couple of years. Next slide, thanks Ruth. So we have 2 different projects here that touch on this intersection I just talked about, but for the mCDR context. Before I talk about these 2 projects, I do want to say the breadth of the work that we do at the consortium is large and it's all over the place. So we've done projects with planetary defense, talking to people about asteroids. We have talked to people about driverless cars, human genome editing. And so when we, over the past couple of years, had this great repertoire of projects come in from the Biden administration's direction for more climate research and action, we built up a very large climate portfolio, which led us to these 2 great projects that we have up here. So the first project that I have is the climate conundrum problem, where we were actually able to go and talk to local communities in Boston and Vancouver about their thoughts about climate challenges, climate change, and then remediation technologies. And this was a really great opportunity to kind of hone in on that trust and value statement that I spoke about earlier. Then following that project, we got the chance to add an expert flavor to that, where we were actually bringing together experts, rights holders, and stakeholders kind of at the top of mCDR to actually say, now that we have this kind of better understanding internally of what the public's interested in, what are the experts interested in, and what are the problems and connections we can see between those communities, and imagine a roadmap for the future of what responsible mCDR development could look like. So I'll talk about the public project first. And since we have so few slides, I'd love to chat afterwards if you want to know more about like the nitty-gritty details of setting up these projects and our design, because I realize I'm skipping a lot for any social scientists in the room, so sorry. So like I said, the Climate Conundrum project allowed us to actually go into communities in Boston and Vancouver and talk to them in a very deliberate way. We do not use surveys, we do not use polls. What we actually do is host day-long forums to create dialogue at tables with people, to bring people from all walks of life of the community that we're in, to actually sit down, have an informed dialogue. We give them great videos, we have experts on hand sometimes to answer questions, and then we walk them through a set of procedures through the day. Lots of times there's fun work boards and game boards, but all of this is to help us understand where the public is sitting at with this new and emerging technology, in this case, mCDR, which, as many of you may know if you're experts in the room or as you've just seen, is a really complex technical approach to using our oceans. So there's a lot of background work to kind of speed up that conversation. But some of the key takeaways that we saw from these Vancouver and Boston conversations I have up here on the slide. And so one of the big things is that the public is really interested in having kind of broad networks so that they can give their input into the conversation. I think this is going to be a common theme in conversations you'll hear here and then outside of this space, that the public wants to find a way to actually give their input and work with projects. So we saw that here in both Vancouver and Boston. They're also a little bit skeptical of the role of private industry when it comes to development of climate technologies more broadly. And in this case, it wasn't a negative skepticism, but more that researchers and local community leaders and indigenous communities were more trusted to be actors that would responsibly develop this. So that gives us a critical insight into thinking of where communities are at and who they would actually trust to do this work, but also maybe where we have a critical gap in communication coming from private industry. Not to say that it's bad, but that maybe there needs to be a little bit more outreach or community values work. Next, we also have where we actually want to be doing this work. mCDR is a place-based technology or a set of place-based technologies, and it can happen in many different ecosystems and sections of the ocean. And so we asked people where they were interested in actually having testing done. And we found that both in Vancouver and in Boston, our communities were really interested in having small, localized testing and national infrastructure instead of large international testing. So I think that's really interesting to think about how they're viewing their community in the aspects of development, looking things more locally. And then lastly, like I think I stated earlier, people really want to have communities more involved and looking to have community leaders being the development leaders for mCDR. So that's an interesting summary from what we've talked to the public about. But one of the big key takeaways from this group was that everyone thought about mCDR as a technology in a broader ecosystem or web of the climate world, not thinking that this would be one solution that fits all and that should be used and everything else is abandoned, but something that should be used in tandem with many other approaches. And for a public who has maybe just heard of this technology for the first time that day, it's really telling to see that they can find the connections between the broader climate community and how these small interventions can make large impacts. Next, let's talk about the experts, because some of you in the room were at these workshops. Thank you for your participation. So the next thing that we did was working on a grant that we got from the National Science Foundation to actually look at this question of community capacity that Nasya talked about earlier. And when we first approached this project, the goal was to have a workshop series that actually convened experts and the public to have conversations about where mCDR is going, what are the challenges, and what are some solutions. Very broad when we started out. And as we kept engaging with the ocean community more and more, we found that capacity building doesn't necessarily only have to happen at a social readiness level to be ready to have the technology and ready to have the conversation. There also needed to be capacity building at kind of that upper level of the people that are doing this research and having these conversations and developing this policy. So over the course of a year and a half, we hosted a set of workshop series, very much in the same way we do our public work, where there's lots of fun table activities and great dialogue. And we came away with a couple sets of key takeaways here that I have. And one thing is that kind of in the same way of the ecosystem and network thinking, one of the big takeaways was that governance and research and development shouldn't be happening at a single actor level, but should be happening in a broader ecosystem or network where everyone's working together, or at least speaking or cognizant of what's going on. And that local and indigenous involvement and having those communities and speaking with them, involving them in projects isn't something that should be a checklist or isn't something that should be an afterthought, but should instead be procedural to how projects are developed, carried out, and where they're hosted. Next, we also have that our participants in our pools actually prioritized small actions instead of larger actions too. So this was incredible alignment between what the public felt was necessary for responsible development and where the experts fall. So that's really great to see two totally separate communities landing on the same thing. And then lastly, the experts and everyone that we had kept coming up with this broader theme of having a coordinated knowledge network, or to quote one of our experts, a harmonization of knowledge, recognizing the amazing work that's been going on at so many different project levels and field trials, and there's a breadth of information that's out there. But if you're a startup that's first starting, it can feel daunting or like there's not a lot of resources to support that starting out that initial phase. And so one of the big solutions that was recommended was actually supporting regional hubs for mCDR research. And these are places that could have longevity of social and community building being pillars of trust and upholding community values in wherever the place that they're in. This could also be a place, if you were in our earlier panel, where that kind of coordinated pool and funding idea could also play a role in actually supporting a wider breadth of mCDR research. And so that kind of coordinated research regional hub was probably one of our biggest takeaways that addressed both things from the public perspective and the expert perspective. And I think I have one closing slide here. Just some final big thoughts to consider, especially as we're going to have more of an open dialogue together. So the public and experts both want these coordinated efforts. They want coordinated networks. Everyone wants to be talking to each other, which is so nice because in all of these different projects that I've said we work on at the consortium, this is in a way kind of unique to the ocean community. So it's great to see that on both sides, everyone wants this coordination and is pushing for it and actively taking steps to it. And then I want to highlight how much work has already been done. We have great examples of regional hubs with NOAA's Sea Grant program. We've seen an amazing kind of like pilot of what that hub could look like. There's been so many great public engagement examples that have come out from these field trials. So when we're looking to imagine like what that future looks like, people are already doing it. We just kind of need to find a way to coordinate that knowledge and then expand it to something that has longevity and is easier to access.
Kelly, one of the most important aspects of science-informed decision-making, which has come up a little bit, is the science, which is, something that you know a little bit about. Mara touched on this about how communities see different people as trusted messengers. And every survey, every conversation that I've been a part of, every time they say, well, we'll trust the scientists. Yet I do see this difference between scientists at research institutions or not-for-profit places versus scientists who have decided to exit academia to do startups. I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit more about what it means to be one of the trusted individuals with that responsibility, in mCDR is having that role. How bringing different scientists together is still coordinating the accessible information we need. And, maybe just the starting places. Why did the National Academies, why mCDR? Like, why was that one of the things that, picked up in the ocean portfolio?
Thanks for that question. So building on to a lot of what everyone else has said already, I will start with just saying, pushing back a little bit on people trust the scientists, and say, I really think more than that, people trust statements that are supported by science. Doesn't necessarily matter in a lot of cases who's saying it, but having that evidence. And that's exactly why the National Academies exists. And that's why we have this mCDR standing committee. So basically, I mean, there's so much information out there. There's new information coming out every day, lots of pros and cons and everything in between. We've got scientists, engineers, venture capitalists, and other entrepreneurs trying to move forward with the promising approaches. There's a lot of fantastic work going on, and it's one of those rays of hope if you're fortunate to learn about that. And there's the growing carbon market. The first carbon removal credits produced by mCDR startup are now being sold. So whether you support it or not, the field is moving forward. And at the same time, there's big questions that we need to answer regarding the impacts of scaling up. And as you've heard, it's complicated. Understatement of the year. So mCDR is a social technical system. You don't just have to get the science and the technology right, but you've really got to correctly integrate social priorities and social support as you move forward. And just as everyone's already said. So the role of the Marine CDR committee is really to provide trusted, peer-reviewed resources on this complicated system. And we want to provide that information to scientists, to program managers, to policymakers, Hill staff, and other decision makers. We want to make it accessible to a lot of different levels to help them navigate this evolving state of the science, to help clarify what the potential is of mCDR as an intervention strategy, and to identify the important questions that need to be answered to keep moving forward responsibly. And then along those same lines, to kind of put up guardrails on our reliance on the ocean as a climate solution. So there's a lot of work going on, and a lot of great work, and a lot of us are doing kind of the same thing. The difference is that this is a consensus product. We have a committee of 19 volunteer experts, but we also bring in a lot of other folks to give us information throughout the year. And so what we produce goes through peer review, rigorous peer review. It is supported by evidence, but it's also supposed to represent the community broadly. And so that's kind of what we can offer this community. So next slide. So the context, this was established in 2020, or this effort was anyway. Climate Works Foundation came to us and asked us to do a consensus study looking at 6 different marine carbon dioxide removal approaches and really assess the viability of scaling any of these up to meet our climate goals. And in doing so, they wanted us to develop a research strategy to help fill those critical gaps. So that's what we did. The 6 approaches, people always ask, how did you decide that? Well, it was in our contract. That's how we did it. It was honestly a wild ride after we republished this. This was 12 experts, I believe. We did the writing over less than a year. We released the report in early 2022, and it was a great uptake of the report. It's been used all over the world. It's one of the top reports of the academies ever. Yeah, in the top 1%. Last time I looked, it was over 17,000 downloads. And more importantly than that, the research recommendations got action. So there were a lot of funding opportunities that were, I won't give our report credit because they were in the works already, but that came following the release of this report. So It wasn't long after the release, I was at a COP meeting and people started saying, what's next? Some of my committee members were there and they were like, no. It was a lot of work. So, it wasn't just, how can we be most relevant going forward as all of this great research is happening? Some of the topics that we've discussed could be updated. There may be some things that we left out. Some people commented on, well, you talk about the carbon going into the deep. Well, then what? You didn't really talk so much about the deep ocean impacts. So that's something that we're trying to tackle more holistically. What about co-locating approaches? So there's a lot of different things that we could add. So there's that. And then there's how do you respond nimbly and efficiently? So the Academy's process is a lot. From the time we get a contract, we issue a call for nominations. That will be open for a month usually. We sit through the nominations. We vet our folks, make sure there's no conflict of interest, or financial conflict of interest, I should say. And then we put the committee together, and then we've got to get on everyone's schedules, and we've got to hold the meetings and do the information gathering, and it's a lot, and it's all volunteers, right? So it's hard to move too quickly. So we're trying to think about how we can make this better, or make this more responsive to a rapidly changing field. So we have the standing committee now that can update different modules, and then they can, remain on board so that we don't have to start from scratch every year. So that's kind of the idea. So next slide. So the solution was a new product for the National Academies. So we're digital first now and an updatable report. So the first thing we did was digitize the entire 2022 report, which is just, putting it into a web page and interlinking and all that kind of fun stuff. This is a mock-up of where we are right now. So all the chapters turn into modules, and each one of them has their own digital object identifier, so that we can keep track of where we are with which one. So right now, as of today, everything is from the 2022 release, but in a few months, several of these modules will be updated and will be a 2026 product. I guess that's all I need to say about that. Next slide. So let's see. So the standing committee's task is really to keep the content current and relevant. Our initial sponsor, I failed to mention, is Carbon to Sea Initiative. They believed in this product and got us started and paid for this first update, which is fantastic. That committee is tasked to kind of look at the field, identify what the priorities are to be updated, and kind of, chart out their plan to tackle that. We're tasked with contractually, we've got to update at least one module a year. And I will say we failed miserably. We're releasing 4. We've worked really hard, and the committee just wants to do everything all at once. So that's why we're a few months delayed. So we also have this new component that we added, which is the state of marine CDR. This is going to be an annual or biennial, we haven't decided yet, publication that really does this high level of where we are with the field. And so it's really, not so much for the scientists, but more for the folks really trying to understand where we are, the program managers trying to understand where to fund, and really getting a snapshot on, where have the efforts been in the past couple of years, where have we seen a lot of movement, what are the remaining big questions. So that's kind of I will say maybe a 20-pager, very high level kind of overview of mCDR. Let's see what else. So I think I covered all that. We can move to the next slide. So the 2026 update. I'm in peer review right now. So we're hoping to release this later this summer. August is a safe bet. The new release will include the State of Marine CDR, which is that new module, and then an updated introduction, because this is, well, some of the information was already changed, but we had to describe the process again. We have a greatly expanded governance module. At the time when we wrote this report, there just wasn't a lot of mCDR specific research to point to. Now there is. And so we've greatly expanded it. We've added a section on ethics and justice. And then the social considerations is a lot larger and in-depth than the last report. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And then ocean alkalinity enhancement. For those that know a lot about this, you know that that area has boomed. So that was our first approach to tackle. So the new ocean alkalinity enhancement module is greatly expanded upon what we released 5 years ago. And then the 2027 update and beyond, it's up to the community. So I have a bunch of different boxes here representing different ideas that might come from the community. One thing we've heard is adding a coastal blue carbon module, and we can actually do this quite easily because in 2019 we produced a negative emissions technology report that had a chapter on that. So we can use that as a starting point and then go from there updating. The committee very much wants to build out a comprehensive monitoring, reporting, and verification module. It was very difficult, honestly, to update just one approach without that as a base. So lesson learned there, but that's next on our list. The other one, seaweed, direct carbon dioxide capture, nutrient fertilization. Those are, kind of depends on what the sponsor wants and what the community wants. So the committee is not beholden to the sponsor, but if our sponsor comes in and they are only interested in seaweed cultivation, well, that's probably one of the modules we're going to update. But that doesn't mean it's the only thing we can do. And the idea is, every couple of years to get through all of them and keep it relevant. And I say all of them, not necessarily. There's some that haven't moved a lot, like ecosystem recovery is a great thing to do and it's awesome. It hasn't moved a lot. There's really not a need to tackle that right now. So let's see. Yeah, so we'll see. The committee will begin planning that next cycle as soon as we get this release out. So next slide. Oh, and our awesome standing committee. So I just wanted to point out that, the folks doing this work are scientists, all different types of scientists, engineers. Some of them work at academic institutions, some of them are in national labs. We have many folks from Canada and Europe. There's just so much work going on worldwide. We are a little bit limited and in terms of including Australia, New Zealand, just because we do have to have meetings. But we try to bring in the additional perspectives as reviewers or just as I guess during our meetings when we can. So we can't have everything on there, but we do have a pretty wide variety. Some people will likely rotate off. We'll have more people rotating in, and we can always kind of adjust the makeup depending on what the committee decides to tackle that year. So that's all I have. Thank you. There's my email is up there, and also there's a link to the standing committee webpage, which you can be updated in all the information coming out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we do have about 30 minutes, 25 minutes for Q&A. While you're considering which questions to ask our panelists, I'm going to put something juicy on the table to discuss. Mara, I want to start with you. Why does mCDR get so much heat?
I'm going to answer this question from the public perspective of why mCDR gets so much heat. So what we found in the beginnings of our public engagement work for mCDR is that people were very skeptical about a technology that they themselves hadn't yet engaged with, and one that at certain stages and development stages can seem very theoretical and is by nature more challenging to explain than other climate technologies. The public is very comfortable understanding things like solar power and things like that, but it's more challenging when we get into these technical aspects. So I would say that's a PR thing. But what we've actually found was that people don't dislike mCDR when we take the time to actually talk to them and involve them in conversations and have transparency and openness to answering questions. being there to answer questions when people say, well, what does it mean when you say you're gonna be in this place? And have you talked to our local municipal water people yet? And just being able to be in a space and answering questions actually mitigates that problem of having people not trust something or giving something a bad rap. So I would say when you actually talk to people, they do like mCDR.
It's good to hear. Yeah, Ariana.
Do I need to wait for a microphone? Or are we good? I'll just go.
Yeah.
This was fascinating. Thank you. One of the things we have to move the science forward is funding, and lots of it ideally. And this is a challenging time in this country for funding. So thoughts on how do we get more funding into fulfilling the recommendations in the National Science Academy, right? Like how do we move this forward faster?
I could put in another plug for my regional hubs idea. So one of the things that seems to be a challenge, especially in mCDR, is that there's so much good work happening all over the place, but not necessarily like a condensing of people working together on the same projects. This is a very like cooperative community, I will say, but where there is a lack of funding right now, something to maybe bridge a gap is to actually have more coordinated efforts. And then thinking like how our funding space has changed recently and the impacts on that. The plug for the regional hubs is that gives a sense of longevity. With more partnerships that you have in, there may be times where things need to be more lean, but that regional hub model will be something that actually boosts longevity because you can lean on different partners at different times. And when you're more in a community and situated in it, you have a sense of care where there is maybe a little bit more community buy-in and support. So that's not an answer to where we get more funding, but something to think about like in the future for climate technologies in general. How do we actually maintain the work that we can do? And I think regional hubs is an answer to that.
I love the regional hub idea. This is not brilliance or anything. I'm sure you guys are all doing the same thing, but what we have been doing more is just trying to reframe our work and the mCDR work to really speak to issues of national security, food security, things that really resonate. And so we really have been reframing that way. AI, there's a lot of different things that we can talk about that that mCDR is a great fit for. So that's kind of what we've been doing at the academies.
I come from a background in fisheries, coastal resilience, and aquaculture. So much more on the like tangible kind of touching and feeling and eating and all those kind of commodities. One of the things coming from almost purely ocean work that I noticed when I came into mCDR that I was so surprised about is there's so many people who only see it as climate work. They don't see it as ocean work. They see it as climate work, but it's happening in the ocean, which can be helpful. I mean, it is a part of the CDR umbrella, and we do need all of the options. It's, this is not a one thing is going to be the answer. But one of the things that I would like to see is more of the diversification of ocean philanthropy. Those who see that this is actually a way to, yes, it is taking something out of the ocean so the ocean can keep taking it, but it stores it for long term, and that will help the ocean. That does improve the ocean's health. That's what I say at the beginning is at Ocean Visions, we see the climate issues as the worst pressures on ocean health. So bringing in more of the people who don't just see it as another form of CDR, but as working with the ocean, working with communities who know the ocean, working with the agencies who know the ocean. Historically in the US, the Department of Energy has been where mCDR gets a lot of the funding and where it gets some direction. I'd like to really start seeing that diversification. I think that would be really helpful of also more coordination, bringing more together and looking at this as a holistic issue. The other thing I'd just like to note on kind of funding is we should not ignore the tool that is the private sector. If someone can get paid to do research, that's great. We should be really happy about that. We should also be following more of the Carbon 180 model of public-private partnerships. Make sure it's transparent, make sure that the data is still getting out there to all the other scientists and things. But it is just as much of a way for us to get to de-risk mCDR, to identify which things should move ahead, which things need additional investigation. We should not ignore the power of that purse to move itself forward. Any other questions?
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Jamin. I am an incoming, or I guess I just arrived 2 days ago, Canals Fellow.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm curious, how do we balance the urgency of these issues, especially CDR, with community inclusion? What are your philosophies on pace setting?
So the question was, when we have to look at the urgency of the ocean climate crises against the speed of trust with communities, how do we balance that?
I think that's a great question. I think something that we try to keep in mind at Carbon 180 is like, we want good carbon removal to happen and not just carbon removal generally. I think it's very important to like remind people and keep in mind that just because you want something to happen doesn't mean that it will. And what I mean when I say that is communities, although not always successful, do have the ability to resist. And like, do you want to try to implement work that people are resisting, or do you want to do good work? And so I think there's like an element where people are like, what's the timeline then for engaging communities? Like, how much time do we dedicate to community input? Generally, that is such a hard to pin down question. And it depends on how ready a community is to receive. Like, are folks on the ground already well versed in mCDR? Or is there time and energy that needs to be invested in making sure that people know what mCDR is for them to have an opinion on it? Do folks have the capacity coupled with the knowledge to engage? So when you're convening people, are you paying them for their time, or are they coming to talk to you for free at 5:30 on a Thursday? Like, do you have childcare? Are you feeding people? Are you attributing the knowledge that people who are experts in their local areas, like, are you attributing that knowledge to them? Are you platforming that? Those are all time investments. And there is like an imperative because we're talking about global climate goals. But for people on the ground, at this point, because carbon removal is not led by communities, it's a top-down solution. And we're using a top-down solution to fix local problems. And so we're coming in and saying like, y'all, this is an imperative. Like, if it's not this by this year, then the effects are cataclysmic. And people are like, gas is $7. Like, you have to ground carbon removal in something that's real for people. And that's also a time investment. And so I think it's not a very clear answer to your question, but the speed of scale for carbon removal can't outpace community development. Just for speaking from a place of I don't think that the field will succeed if it doesn't have people's investment in it. I just think people are in the best positions they've been in to advocate for themselves and their communities and to resist and push back. And so what's the name and legacy that we want to create for carbon removal? And so, yeah, very long-winded way of saying there is no good carbon removal without communities. And so the time investment just kind of is what it is. That might be underwhelming, but I can.
I will actually add to this because everything you're saying, I can confirm from the experts. Because we actually asked this as part of our expert workshop series where we gave people this task to kind of imagine like what are these solutions to grand challenges for marine carbon dioxide removal. responsible development, particularly with communities. What does that look like? And we gave them a challenge where we said, okay, you've now just come up with like this great solution scenario. What if we did it warp speed style? And we said, you have all the money, you have all the resources, you have everything. What does that look like? And I kid you not, it broke the conversation because everyone from the very first hurdle hit the community challenge, where it doesn't matter how fast you can do the work. It doesn't matter how much more money you have to do the work. There is a basic pace of doing it responsibly. And so when we asked that question of, can you do responsible and can you do fast? The answer was, our brains can't even function that way because there is no solution to do that. So it's one of those challenges where I think specifically for mCDR, that really situates it in the broader climate conversation where we know we're looking at something that could be a tool, but we have a lot of unanswered questions and we want to know the answers. But while we're doing that, other things need to happen at the same time. So we can't push it faster, but we should still be doing it, but there needs to also be other action. So not speed upable.
Not speed upable. Yeah, great.
But Beltran, I want to piggyback into this question and a couple of the answers, because there is what we're talking about here, which is a little theoretical. And yes, we ask people and people say, yes, we would like to do this. But then we have the reality of our social context, where you say, Mara, it's like, it will not succeed if it doesn't have community support. Conservation has succeeded for 150 years without including Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, right? So we have been doing that for 150 years. There is a reason why there is a space called Upwell and there's CHOW. There's a reason why there's an organization called Black in Marine Science, right? So in that context, and understanding that, yes, maybe we want to do it, but when urgency hits the ground, when we're having a private-public relationship where there is going to be money being made, and those imperatives get often pushed first in front of the community, why should we believe or think that the mCDR space is actually going to be different than what our social context tells us that is what's going to happen?
I can jump in a little bit from some of the work that I've experienced since coming to Ocean Visions. I can't promise that it's going to all be different. That's not on me. I'm not all of society, and we live in a capitalist situation. The Global South is still not getting the investments equal to the Global North. What I can say about the mCDR space is there is an African mCDR partnership. They are writing their own roadmap for the continent. I was able to visit with 13 of the countries who started that, and all of them are focused on for Africa, from Africa, of the interests. While, of course, there are partners here because we have the expertise, we have the networks, there is support. It is still being driven by their interests that stem from mangroves, that stem from how do we have blue economy futures for our young people. The African continent is a very young continent. It has so many young people who are looking for, what do I do? What is the future for me? So there's a lot of innovation capabilities and all these things, and mCDR can be very technical. So that's been very exciting to see as something of a bit of a difference. Seeing Dr. Miriam Swale from Kenya, Ocean Innovation Climate Hub in Kenya. She has been at many of the international spaces where mCDR is being spoken about. There have been some other GEOS fellows who have been in the spaces. They are just a few women, but I have been very impressed with how people have gravitated and how strongly those women said, these are going to be our projects. These are going to be our communities. So that gives me a little bit of hope. Another aspect that I've been really excited about is there's a project called Growing Oceans. It's some research being done in Tonga on natural analogous nutrient fertilization. The team is from the US and they were invited into Tonga to do these lake bottle experiments with this analogous study. But all of the data belongs to Tonga. It was very carefully crafted, was a social science group in Tonga with the government of Tonga. Marine scientists, part of in Tonga, went out to learn how the bottling experiments were done. All of it will reside with Tonga and not with the institution that started it. And that's also the kind of thing that gives me hope of the people in Tonga will get to decide, do we move this out of the stage? And how much of it are we going to do ourselves? And that gives me hope. But again, I can't say it's all going to be different. But things like this that are starting so early in this very young field that, I mean, many people still hesitate to say an industry is coming out of it. I'm hopeful that we don't end up with conservation refugees. I'm hopeful that this can help. I'm hopeful that this does have opportunities for community-led efforts. But I also want to ask Mara, this is a question I have, like, what does community-led mCDR look like? You know, do we have examples of that right now? Because, I mean, the examples I just gave are close, but not quite there.
Yeah, I really appreciate your sentiments too in bringing this up, because I think it is like crucial to putting this in like the broader global context, which is not necessarily something we've really touched on so much on this panel, while we did have good remarks on the earlier panel. I want to bring up something that actually came up in our expert workshops, where we had the opportunity to have participants from US Indigenous communities and Canadian First Nations, which if you've ever been in a space where you get to talk to multiple Indigenous communities at the same time, there's this wealth of perspective sharing that gives you a broader context to where we kind of are in the US right now, which is what largely this conversation has been about. And one of the examples of, I think, community-led or the beginning of community-led mCDR is a First Nations example, where when we find that we're talking to our Canadian counterparts, they have businesses, they have tools, they're already so heavily institutionalized in their own communities that they're the agency to say, we want this project for our community, we're doing it, and having community partners to do that work is an amazing thing that I wish that we had more of in the US. But so that's a great example of something that I think we were blindsided by when we were hosting those conversations, having mostly talked with our Indigenous communities here in the US. Then to bring the Canadian perspective, they're like, oh, we've done all these other projects already. We're ready for mCDR. We want to do it, and are just looking for partnerships to build that. So I do think in that way, we have examples that are already coming on board, that they're getting ahead of the game in a way that I think hasn't shown up in other climate technologies. I'd also like to bring the perspective of lots of the fisheries folks that we've talked to in our conversations, and the amount of times that I've heard from them about the damage to their community and trust levels when things like offshore wind are brought up. They know that. They have so many community perspectives and stories to share, and they're reflecting on that when they're coming to the mCDR table, and they're saying, hey, we don't want this again. We're ready to come to the table. Now that's a big task, because there's a lot of educational components and conversation components that go into bringing mCDR to a fisheries community, but they're already here. They want to talk about it, and I think that's where we have this kind of lessons learned perspective from other climate technologies. I also can't say if that means that everything's going to be better, but it's great to see that there's already things that point to a different direction than we've had in the past. I wish I could guarantee that everything was going to be great, but that's all I have.
With that, just really quickly, just to piggyback off of Mara's points, I think that's something that our organization Carbon 80 does that's a little bit unique, is our regranting program. I mentioned it a little bit in our slideshow, but a part of that objective is partnering with community-based folks. We exchange capacity, so part of that is funding. Part of that is like a bi-directional educational exchange. So we give them a 101, 201 of what carbon removal mCDR means. And in exchange, they partner with us to try to design carbon removal at a local level. That's under our umbrella of what we call radical philanthropy, which is we provide that funding unrestricted. Folks can use it how they'd like. We've had people who use that funding towards local disaster relief. We've had people use that funding towards building out teams that are dedicated to carbon removal. But the point of that funding, especially with our newest marine CDR cohort, is that people in places, coastal communities in Alaska, we partner with folks, their acronym is CLAM, which I think is amazing, but it's community leaders in mCDR. Those are indigenous folks, those are scientists in Alaska, community members, people who are part of fishermen's unions, and they're leading workshops to figure out what good carbon removal looks like for them. There are also people who are dealing still with the environmental effects of oil spills. So their perspective is like, how do we encourage carbon removal from a genuine place of like ecological trauma? Like if we put faith in something and it doesn't work, we're left holding the bag again. We're also partnering with people in Puerto Rico. The acronym is ISER. It's the Institute for Social and Ecological Research. They have an interest in blue carbon, mangroves, nurseries, and it's work that they've been doing. There are carbon benefits to that work, and they want to figure out how to bolster that and scale that locally, making sure that it stays local owned and that the work is meeting local priorities. We also partner with folks in Hawaii, that's Aina Momona. It's locals, indigenous folks who have been doing conservation work for years. They're very interested in like the policy advocacy side of it, and making sure that community agency and decision making are central. So I say all that to say, I totally agree with your point. We've been doing conservation work for 150 years. I was educated in the Aldo Leopold School, and no shade to that man. But his depictions of indigenous people and Black people have aged so horribly. Conservation work does have a lot of racism and discrimination in its roots. And I think there's an opportunity with carbon removal because it's not 150 years old that we're in on the ground floor. And so we're able to elevate people whose opinions matter the most to us and put them in rooms with people like project developers and policymakers to be able to say, this is great, I want to partner with this. Or actually, I don't think this is good at all. This is what you need to do better. And so I think that emphasis gives me personally a lot of hope for mCDR because there are fabulous local people who are figuring out how to make it better as we speak.
Thanks. And I'll also plug, if there are folks from the Global South who have an interest in mCDR or could become interested in mCDR, I'll plug that ClimateWorks is putting together a stipend to help those people get their voices into more of the international spaces. So while you can go to the Ocean Vision's website and look at our tool for where the pilot projects are in the world for mCDR, you will see almost a line across for Global North, there's a few in the Global South. That might start changing soon. And but so far it has been because people are identifying what part of mCDR they want to start. So I'll just plug that they do have that stipend to start a little bit more of the exchange in both directions. We have time for one more question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Danny Richter. I'm an independent consultant, and I'm wondering what are the policy traction points for mCDR, whether it's with Capitol Hill or whether it's at the state level, the local level, international governments. Where's your work intersecting with policymakers?
Oh, I so wish you were here this morning. This morning we did have a panel, and it was about mCDR and US policy, but we did record it, so we can share it with you. So Ocean Visions, Carbon to Sea, Carbon 180, World Resources Institute, and many others are in a coalition where we're working on certain policies. Again, to make sure that the MCR research and development is done responsibly, but we all get some more answers in this uncertainty. So recently, there's been the successful bipartisan introduction of the Rescue Oceans Act, which really does focus on mCDR, RD&D, and the opportunity to move things that are proving themselves in the lab to trials in the water, which would be the next step. We also have had some successes with appropriations. It's still very small, 25 million is really a very small ask when we're looking at like 40 million are needed for some basics. But it's a start, and it's a really good signal, and I'm really hoping that those are good signals. I also come from policy, good signals for investors to continue, again, using that tool of the private sector as well. So there are some efforts here in the US that are evolving. In states, there is quite a bit of work. I think in Massachusetts, there was a roadmap that just came out. California has a few bills where MCR could be a part of it. Folks like me are really looking for, is it just CDR or can MCR be a part of these pieces of legislation or policy? One of the things to note though about MCR in this like permitting space is there are some avenues where existing permits already work. So for example, if you were incorporating ocean alkalinity enhancement into wastewater management, it will still have to come under the permits for that wastewater management. So pH cannot meet a certain level, it has to stay within this range. So there are some other avenues where permitting structures that already exist are applicable to certain kinds of mCDR projects and the research that can go with them. But happy to talk more about that afterwards. And in front of you is a very good government relations person from Gardner who knows quite a bit about Rescue Oceans Act and everything else that's happening. All right, with that, I'm gonna ask for some closing words from everybody. If you are, I think all of us are going to the reception, the MCR reception after this. I invite you to join us at Elephant and Castle. Begins at 4, goes till 6, so you have a perfect window to get to fish fry afterwards. If you're going to the happy hour, what would you hope that people come up to you and keep talking to you about?
I will actually be on a plane during happy hour. But I hope people email and reach out to talk more about community benefits, lifting marginalized voices, and how to make sure that mCDR scales really responsibly.
We're gonna miss you. Let's see, I will be there. I would be happy to talk about any of our public engagement work. If any of those fun buzzword projects I gave at the beginning interest you as well, you can totally pick my brain on that. But I'd love to talk to all of you more about where you've connected with the things that I'm saying, and if there's ways that reflecting on your own work, you can see some echoes or things that maybe you would want to add to our conversation that we're having at CSPO about mCDR.
Yeah, so I have another meeting at 4:30. I am very bummed to miss you all. But I will say I'll do my ask a little bit differently. What I would love is our digital report is releasing in a couple months. And I greatly appreciate feedback on how we can make this most useful to you in your work. Be on the lookout for there was some information shared earlier. My email is easy to find. KOSKVIG. Please just reach out if you want any information, if you need any information on upcoming events, I can put you on our listserv. But yeah, we will be releasing in the August timeframe, and as we think about the pathway forward, it's just really important for us to develop our program in a way that is most useful to the community at large. So I welcome everyone's feedback.
Thank you, and hope to see you in half an hour at Elephant and Castle. Please reach out to us. There's also a few other people here who work on mCDR, so take some chips, take some pastries, take some cookies, and some drinks, and continue to talk about your concerns, the uncertainties, and how you would like to see them addressed.